Hello fellow TuTubers, it's Miss R here and we are back with another set of lessons for Language Paper 1. Now what I'm going to be doing differently this time is I'm going to be going through all of the questions in this one video as opposed to breaking it up into 5 different videos. And to make it easier, just in case you don't want to go through all of the questions, I'm going to put the timings in the comments, not in the comments, in the description at the bottom so you can skip to whichever question you see fit. Or you can watch the whole video and go through all of the tasks. It's up to you. Let me know which option you think is easier, whether I split it into 5 videos or do it all in one. Let me know in the comments below. Okay, so this time we're going to be looking at an extract from the novel called The Strange Train. And we're going to be looking at question 1 first. But first, just like last time, we're going to be reading the extract and looking at some keywords. So, let's read the extract. First of all, on the top right of the screen, it says this extract is from the beginning of a short story called Strange Train. It tells a story of a young woman who is being stalked. The train station was heaving with commuters, dressed in their shiny suits and hulking their bulky briefcases. They swarmed down the steps like a river of capitalism. Noisily shouting into their mobile phones, they pushed their way out of the station and past Jessie, who was stood waiting patiently to buy her ticket. Fortunately, Jessie was travelling in the opposite direction. She was heading back into the city. The doors beeped and stuttered open, and she took an empty seat by the window. Headphones in, phone out, brain switched off. Soon lost in her own thoughts. A shadow fell across her. A man had sat down in the seat opposite. His body turned entirely towards her, and 2 watery blue eyes looked intensely at her, as if waiting for her to answer a question. Uncomfortable with the unwanted company, she shifted in her seat. Trying not to make eye contact, she considered his appearance. He looked alarmingly nondescript, as if someone had dressed themselves with the explicit intention to blend in. Jessie's heart began to beat faster. She tried to swallow, but found a lump in her throat. Suddenly, she was itching to move, the seat beneath her impossibly uncomfortable. Her overactive imagination was going into overdrive. Rising, the sweat on her hands slipped as she tried to grab the hang bar. She looked around for a different seat. They were all empty, save a little old lady sat right at the back of the carriage. Her mind whirred with calculations. Would she be safer in company but further from the exit? No. Stick to the doors. Stumbling across, she stood with her hand poised over the open doors button. Her eyes fixed on an invisible point on the floor. A shadow fell again. Her hammering heart sunk. He was behind her. Beep, beep, beep. Jessie tripped over her own feet as she clattered over the platform, her old Converse trainers slapping the concrete floor. Too loud, she thought. Tears stung her eyes. Panic choked at her voice as she looked round for a station guard, a fellow passenger, anyone. The station was deserted. She approached the turnstile and felt in her pocket for a ticket, but it wasn't there. Whirling round, she was face to face with the stranger. "This is yours, I think." His outstretched hand offered out her small blue neon wallet. Almost tearful in relief and gratitude, Jessie took it, laughing slightly hysterically. "Thank you. Oh, thank you. She failed to finish the sentence. He gave her a bemused smile and moved past her, posting his own ticket into the machine and then left the station. Calm swept over her, and Jessie reprimanded herself for her stupidity and paranoia. Too many horror films, too much Daily Mail, too quick to judge. She slipped the wallet back into her pocket, not bothering to look inside. Her neon blue wallet, containing her ticket, ID, and now a tiny silver circular tracker secreted away inside the lining. Okay, so if you feel like you want to pause the video now and read through that again, feel free to do so. What I would like you to do is look at the 10 words on the right hand side of the screen, and I'd like you to pause the video and define these words. Okay, so here are the definitions. So we've got commuter, a person who travels some distance to work on a regular basis. Swarm, a large or dense group of flying insects. Capitalism, economic, political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit. Nondescript, lacking distinctive or interesting features or characteristics. Word, a low continuous regular sound. Hammering, hit or beat repeatedly. Clattered, make or cause a continuous rattling sound. Deserted, empty of people. Gratitude, being thankful. Paranoia, delusions of persecution, unwanted jealousy, or exaggerated self-importance. Pause the video now just to check what you've got, and if you haven't got some of the words, make sure you write them in. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is I'd like you to pause the video, and I want you to spend approximately 5 to 7 minutes on this task. I want you to find language and structural devices in the extract. So you did something like this if you looked at the last video that I posted. So maybe you could look for verbs, adjectives, adverbs, imagery, and make comments on the beginning, middle, and end. So pause the video now and have a go. So these are some notes that I came up with. Oh, I found some alliterations, shiny suits, bulky briefcases. I found assonance on line 10. That quote there, uncomfortable with the unwanted company, she shifted in a seat. And also where it talked about her overactive imagination was going into overdrive. So those are 2 examples of assonance. Sensory language, shouting, beeped, so things that you can hear. Verbs such as fell and hulking. Imagery, which includes adjectives such as watery blue, neon blue, tiny silver circular. Adverbs, fortunately, alarmingly. Repetition, beep, beep, beep. And for structure, at the beginning I noticed that there's a description of setting. Talks about the station being overcrowded. The second paragraph then introduces the protagonist and the antagonist at the same time. Turning point, line 27, when the antagonist does the unexpected by handing her back her wallet, and the ending is shocking. It leaves a bit of a cliffhanger because we find out that she has now got a tracker in her wallet. Okay, so question 1. Read lines 1 to 6, so in the red box. Write 4 things you learn about the commuters. So you can have a quote or paraphrase. I want you to pause the video now and complete this task. Right, so let's see what you've got. You should have got something along these lines. It was busy, there was lots of commuters, they wore shiny suits, carried briefcases, briefcases were heavy or difficult to carry, they swarmed down the steps, they were noisy, they pushed out of the station, they passed Jessie as they left the station. If you got any 4 of those, please give yourself a tick. A few things that we won't accept is the commuters were heaving or heavy, because that makes no sense. The commuters were shining, doesn't make any sense. They were in a river, they definitely weren't. And anything that isn't from lines 1 to 6, that's what we won't accept. Let's look at question 2. Okay, so question 2 says, look at lines 5 to 10. How does the writer use language here to describe Jessie's train journey? You could include the writer's choice of words and phrases, language features and techniques, and sentence forms. So before we attempt this question, I've got 2 tasks for you. I want you to find me 4 quotations that describe the journey and identify devices in each quote. There may be more than one. I want you to spend no more than 5 minutes on that task, so pause the video now. Okay, so just in case you didn't find any, or if you want to check what you've got against what I have, I found adjectives where it says uncomfortable with the unwanted company. She shifted in a seat. Got a few adjectives in there, uncomfortable and unwanted. And I've also found some sibilants where it says she shifted in her seat. I found the adverb fortunately in the first quote, the first sentence, sorry. Sounds beeped and stuttered. Imagery, 2 watery blue eyes. Don't forget, these are just ideas here. You've probably found some more things as well. Okay, so now we're going to do a table. And what we want to do is in this table, we want to have our quotation. We want to think about how it's describing her journey, because that's the question. We want to zoom in on a keyword or phrase and identify the device and explain the effect. Do that again on another keyword or phrase within the quote that you found, and write about the effect on the reader. So I've done the first one for you, and I've also included 3 additional quotes that you can use. However, you can use your own examples. So I've looked at uncomfortable with the unwanted company, she shifted in her seat. How is this describing her journey? Well, the journey seems unpleasant now that Jessie is around a passenger that she does not particularly feel safe around. Zoom in on a keyword or phrase. I've said the adjectives uncomfortable and unwanted create a negative atmosphere. It shows how uneasy Jessie feels, which creates tension. There must be something about this company that is mysterious and forces Jessie to fear him. Then I've looked at the movements described create sibilance. She shifted in her seat, reinforcing the idea that there is a lot of tension at this point in the extract as it creates an eerie atmosphere. Effect on the reader is made aware of the fear that Jessie feels and may sympathise with her. They will be intrigued to know how the passenger responds to her blatantly scornful body language. So what I'd like you to do now, you might want to spend about 10 minutes on this task. Pause the video now and fill out the rest of the table for me. Don't forget, if you want to use your own examples, you can do. Okay, so now what I would like you to do is I'd like you to turn your table into a full response to the question. You want to write approximately 3 paragraphs for this. Give yourself no more than 15 minutes. As mentioned before, in the exam, you don't want to go past 10 minutes on this question, but we're revising here. So I've written a paragraph for you to help you. But on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, these are things that you want to include. A quote of fewer than 3 words, zooming in on a 1-word quote, identifying a technique or word class, using words such as suggests or implies for inference, exploring the emotional impact of a quote on the reader or character, and linking the quote to overall ideas or meanings of the text. So what I've done here is in my example I've highlighted where I've met this success criteria, and once you've done your response, the best thing for you to do would be to do exactly the same, like annotate or highlight where you've met the criteria. I've said, firstly, during this part of the extract, the writer describes Jessie's feelings and movements. Uncomfortable with the unwanted company, she shifted in her seat. This description instantly makes the journey seem unpleasant now that Jessie is around a passenger that she does not particularly feel safe around. The adjectives uncomfortable and unwanted create a negative atmosphere. It suggests how uneasy Jessie feels, which creates tension. There must be something about this company that is mysterious and forces Jessie to fear him. Additionally, the movements described create sibilance. She shifted in her seat, reinforcing the idea that there is a lot of tension at this point in the extract as it creates an eerie atmosphere. The reader is made aware of the fear that Jessie feels and may sympathise with her. They will be intrigued to know how the passenger responds to her blatantly scornful body language. Okay, so I'd like you to have a go at this yourself, and don't forget, everything that you've put in your table in the last task, you're basically putting that into your response, but just making sure that your response is cohesive, adding a few sophisticated words in there to really explain yourself in detail. Spend no more than 15 minutes on that. Pause the video now. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at question 3. Question 3 says you now need to think about the whole of the source. How is the text structured to interest you as a reader? You could write about what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning, how and why the writer changes this focus as the source develops, and any other structural features that interest you. So all I want you to do is make a comment on the beginning or end of the story. You might have already done that in the first task before we did question 1. And I'd like you to also find and make comments on 2 other structural features. Now, if you're unsure of what other structural features you can look at, in the description bar below I have a link to a PowerPoint with all the language and structural techniques that you'll need for Language Paper 1. So that should help you out. Spend about 5 minutes on this task. Pause the video now. Okay, so as you might have remembered, I looked at the beginning, turning point and ending. At the beginning of this lesson, I said that in the beginning there's a description of the setting, which is the overcrowded train station. In the second paragraph, we are introduced to the protagonist and the antagonist. Line 27, the antagonist does the unexpected when he hands her her wallet back. And the ending is shocking. It leaves a cliffhanger because we find out she has a tracker in her wallet. I've also added some short sentences where it says a shadow fell again and beep, beep, beep. And we're going to turn this into a table just like we did for question 2. So I've looked at beginning, ending, turning point and short sentences. However, if you found some more, please feel free to use your own examples. So when it comes to structure, responding to a structure question, you want to identify the structural feature, include a quote if you can. It's not necessary, but if you can, please do. Explain the writer's choices, explain the effect on the reader, and see if you can make any other links to other parts of the extract. So I've given you an example here. I've looked at the beginning. My quote is, the train station was heaving with commuters. My explanation is that the writer has made the choice to set the scene first to depict the busy and confusing atmosphere. The majority of commuters described creates an untamable atmosphere, almost as if it is the wilderness being described. Reader is able to identify the potential danger in this environment as there is a lack of personal space, and it seems as though all the commuters are only focused on themselves. Links. This opening shows that there are a lot of strangers in the same place at once, which makes Jessie's situation that takes place later on in the extract seem even more scary. In my explanation, I've compared the train station to the wilderness. I've also talked about what the reader is able to identify, given that we're in an overcrowded train station at the time, and also how this opening has an impact on later events in the extract. So I want you to have a go at doing the same for either my examples or your own structural features. I want you to spend no more than 10 minutes on this task and pause the video now. Okay, so now you're going to spend 15 minutes writing up your response. Again, try and aim for 3 paragraphs. When it comes to the success criteria, you need to include, at the very least, a quote with quotation marks, identify the structural feature, link the quote to overall meanings behind the text, explore the emotional impact of the quote on the reader, and link to other parts of the extract. So here is my example. Firstly, in the opening of the extract, the writer informs the reader that the train station was heaving with commuters. The writer has made the choice to set the scene first to depict the busy and confusing atmosphere. The majority of commuters described creates an untamable atmosphere, almost as if it is the wilderness being described. This opening shows that there are a lot of strangers in the same place at once, which makes Jessie's situation that takes place later on in the extract seem even more scary. The reader is able to identify the potential danger in this environment as there is a lack of personal space, and it seems as though all the commuters are only focused on themselves. So what I'd like you to do is pause the video, spend 15 minutes turning your table into a full response, and then see if you can highlight or annotate where you have met the success criteria. Pause the video now. Okay, so now we're on to question 4. Question 4 says, look at line 15 to the end. A student said, this part of the story describing how Jessie panics and runs away from the stalker makes you feel as if you are right there with her. To what extent do you agree? In your response, you could consider your own impressions of the characters, evaluate how the writer creates impressions of the characters, and support your response with references to the text. So I'd like you to spend 5 minutes on the only task, which is to find 4 quotes that describes Jessie's feelings and actions. And don't forget you're finding these quotes within the red box from lines 15 to the end. Spend 5 minutes on that. Pause the video now. Okay, so I found 4 quotes myself. So if you couldn't find all 4, please feel free to use my examples. So I've got Jessie tripped over her own feet as she clattered over the platform. I've got tears stung her eyes, panic choked at her voice. I've got Calm swept over her and Jessie reprimanded herself for her stupidity and paranoia. And now a tiny silver circular tracker secreted away inside the lining. We're going to turn that into a table. The reason why I do so many tables is because it breaks up exactly what you need to include in each question. And the more you practice it, the better you get at it. And by the time it comes to your exams, you know exactly what to put in each response and you won't need the table. In a question 4 response, you want the quote, method, how it supports the statement, and additional comments and effect on the reader. So I've got all of the quotes here for you, and I've also put the methods there for you to make it a bit easier for you. So I've got Jessie tripped over her own feet as she clattered over the platform. We've got a verb, tripped and clattered, preposition over. Tears stung her eyes, panic choked at her voice. We've got emotive language, tears. We've got the verb stung and choked, and we've got the noun panic. Calm swept over her and Jessie reprimanded herself for her stupidity and paranoia. We've got verb swept, which is also kind of personification. And we've got the verb reprimanded. We've got the noun stupidity and paranoia. And we've got the noun calm. And then we've also got now a tiny silver circular tracker secreted away inside the lining. We've got the adjectives tiny, silver and circular. We've got the verb secreted. And we've got the noun lining. So my example here, the one that I've completed, is the first quote. Jessie tripped over her own feet as she clattered over the platform. How does it support the statement? The writer describes Jessie's movements in a way where she looks as if she is unable to control herself. The verbs tripped and clattered create a semantic field of panic and emphasises how her only focus is her safety at this point. The preposition over, when explaining where she was moving on the platform, shows that she was scared to the point where she was not taking notice of her surroundings. Then I've got the methods used in this description allows the reader to feel as if they are with her, as they are able to completely visualise her movements and empathise with her feelings at this point. What I'd like you to do now is pause the video and fill out the rest of the table. Don't forget, if you've got your own examples, feel free to use those. Spend no more than 10 minutes on this task. Pause the video now. Okay, so now you're going to write up your response. Now, when it comes to the success criteria for question 4, don't forget this is a 20-mark question, so you've got to include quite a lot of things. You need to include a quote, preferably fewer than three words. Then you need to zoom in on a one-word quote. You want to mention a technique or word class, identify any structural features that are being used in your quote, use words such as suggests or implies for inference, explore the emotional impact of a quote on the reader, link the quote to the question explaining how the language is relevant to the statement itself, and use a phrase that shows a personal response to the text. So I'm going to read you my response. I fully agree with this statement because the writer really depicts Jessie in a huge panic, allowing us to feel as if we are with her in this moment. Firstly, the writer informs the reader that Jessie tripped over her own feet as she clattered over the platform. Here, the writer describes Jessie's movements in a way where she looks as if she is unable to control herself. The verbs tripped and clattered create a semantic field of panic and emphasises how her only focus is her safety at this point. The preposition over, when explaining where she was moving on the platform, implies that she was scared to the point where she was not taking notice of her surroundings. The methods used in this description allows the reader to feel as if they are with her, as they are able to completely visualise her movements and empathise with her feelings at this point. Pause the video now, spend no more than 25 minutes on this task. You need to write up your response for this question. And when you've finished, see if you can highlight or annotate where you have met the success criteria. Pause the video now. Okay, now we're on to question 5. So we looked last lesson at descriptive and narrative writing. We went into detail as to what you need to include and some top tips on how to sort of master question 5. So what I did go through last lesson was that you'll be asked to choose one task that will require you to write either a description or a narrative. A description is a spoken or written account of a person, object or event, and a narrative is a spoken or written account of connected events, which is in turn a story. I also talked about what kind of devices you can use, what punctuation you can use, and how to vary your sentences as well. So if you didn't go through that lesson, please feel free to go back through, because it goes into detail on what you can include, and it has some tasks to help you improve your writing as well. I will leave the link below to that lesson because I think it's really, really helpful. So I'm not going to go through it again because I've already gone through it. It's probably about a 20 to 30 minute video, and it really goes into detail on certain things that you can do to really master question 5. What we're going to do today, however, is we're going to do some narrative practice. So you may be given an image or just a topic, and we'll be asked to write a short story or a story opening suggested by the image or topic that's there. In this case, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to write a story about a taxi journey. So just a few tips. Write at least 4 paragraphs. Plan out what you will write about in each paragraph. Use your imagination. You'll need this to describe senses and bring the image to life. Even if it's in a story, you want to bring a lot of imagery in there. Use at least 3 different punctuation marks, sentence types, language devices, sentence openers and sentence lengths. And use ambitious vocabulary, and don't forget the table at the bottom. Now, what I would say is if you haven't gone through that last lesson on question 5, I'd say go through that first before you attempt this task. But if you have gone through, I want you to pause the video now and time yourself. I want you to spend no more than 45 minutes writing your story. Now, it doesn't say story opening, so don't forget you're writing a full story, just a short one. Okay, I'm going to stop talking now. 45 minutes, pause the video now. Okay, so you should have completed your first attempt at this task, which is to write a story about a taxi journey. You are now going to write a second attempt, but with my help. Whatever you've written, we're going to try and improve it to make sure it's got more description in there and it includes more techniques that will get you higher marks. So we're going to plan. Hopefully you would have planned in your first attempt, but let's see whether your plan in this attempt is more detailed than the one that you did in your first attempt. So the first thing I want you to do is you're going to write some bullet points down regarding the scene. So we want to think about what the weather's like, what time of day, what time of year, where is the taxi, what is the driver doing, what sort of shift have they had. Write down some ideas on your new plan for your second attempt. Spend no more than 3 minutes on this. Pause the video now. Okay, now I want you to write some bullet points about inside the taxi driver's mind. What are they hoping for? So think about what kind of things he might be hoping for. I'm going to give you some ideas after, but I want you to think of some ideas on your own first. Spend no more than 2 minutes on this task. Pause the video now. Next, we've got the taxi picks up the passenger. Describe their entrance and the passenger. So write some ideas down about how this passenger enters the taxi and what the passenger might look like or sound like. Anything you can think of. Spend no more than 3 minutes on this task. Pause the video now. The next 2 things I want you to do is to describe the journey. So what is the journey like? Maybe what they're saying, maybe what they're seeing, what they're hearing. And also think about what conversation the taxi driver and the passenger have. What does the passenger confess to the taxi driver? Pause the video now and spend no more than 5 minutes on these 2 tasks. Finally, I'd like you to think about when the passenger leaves the taxi. The taxi driver observes something that connects to the confession. What could it be? So we're creating a bit of mystery in this story here. So write some ideas down now. Spend no more than 2 minutes on this task. Okay, so what I've done now is I've got some examples for each of the boxes for you, but instead of me putting bullet points, I've turned it into a description that can give you some more ideas to add to your second attempt. So I've said, light cascaded down in an aureate shower of gold through the parting clouds. The storm that had raged for the best part of the morning had grumbled its last roll of thunder, and now the wet pavements were being warmed by the midday sun. A black cab waited outside the train station. The sun had driven away the demand, and now Joe's radio was silent, and she leaned her elbow dreamily on the window and looked up at the intense blue sky peeking through the grey-white clouds. Now, when it comes to the next part, I've said that Joe's mind wandered. Spring now, almost summer, almost time to leave this city and escape, maybe by plane, train, she didn't care. The mode of transport was a secondary concern for her. What mattered to Joe was the destination. Her heart ached for the shimmer of sunlight on the sea, and her body yearned to feel sand beneath her feet, and her mind pleaded to be unshackled from this relentless toil of work. A car horn blared. Joe's attention snapped back to the present. Now, here's where the passenger comes in. Passengers emptied out of the station, checking their Google Maps and looking around gormless and dazed. Joe's eyes tracked one of these gormless passengers as he bumbled about and finally ended up at her passenger door and tumbling in. The man was dressed like a tramp, and Joe's nose wrinkled in disgust. He was no more than 20 and had been caught in the rain as his heavy fisherman's jumper was soaked. It had 2 gaping holes under his right arm, and his jeans were ripped and frayed. Joe noticed that he had no belt, and instead he had tied a red string through the loops. Inside, she groaned. The passenger mumbled incoherently. She shifted round in her seat and was going to ask him to repeat himself, when he dug a grubby hand into a pocket and pulled out a scrap of paper with an address and a crisp £50 note. Winding through the back roads of the city, the journey pulled the taxi down into the underbelly of the town. They rolled past the buildings with boarded up windows, blind to the criminal activity taking place on the front doorstep. The sky above seemed to be returning to the grey of the morning, and the streets were dark once again. The dream beach felt further away than ever. Joel stole a look behind her. Her passenger was sat with his head in his hands. "Bad day, buddy." There was something tragic about his mysterious, enigmatic young man. "Yeah, you could say that," he laughed. A hard kind of laugh that knifed and sliced the air. A laugh devoid of humour. The laugh of someone who doesn't know what it means to laugh anymore. Joe waited to see if he would say any more, and the quiet hung in the air like ice, freezing the moment in time. In the days and weeks and months that came to pass, Joe would often think back to the moment and wonder how different things would have been if she'd just changed the subject. "Yesterday my father died," he whispered, the words hoarsely. "And today I found out he was murdered. And I found that out because his ghost told me." He laughed again, that same maniacal strangled cry. Joe didn't reply. She thought of her beach. It felt small and silly now. "He wants me to avenge his death. This morning I wanted to. And now I don't know if I should." His voice trailed off and returned his head to his hands. The sat-nav beeped. They had arrived at their destination. Click, the door closed. He was gone. Jo looked at the clock. Her shift was over. She realised her heart had been racing, and in her wing mirror she watched the wretched figure disappear down a side road. As she went to pull away, her attention was caught by a school kid crossing the road. Hesitating, pausing, putting one foot out and then back again in some kind of bizarre soundless dance, Jo drove off, not staying to watch if he ever made his mind up. Okay, so that's my example of my short story, and hopefully you've got some idea of how you can improve yours. So now I want you to spend 45 minutes doing your second attempt. Pause the video now and see if you can use your new notes and the inspiration you got from my short story and make yours even better. Pause the video now. Okay, so finally, just to finish this off, I'm not going to read these to you, but I'd like you to have a look at these two other examples of a taxi journey. So I've got a first attempt on the left hand side of the screen and I've got a second attempt on the right hand side. So I want you to have a look at those and again, see if you can get any inspiration from them. You might want to try to do your story again, or you might want to find some vocabulary and add to your vocabulary list as well. But use this however you feel fit. But I hope that you've learned something from this lesson and that you've enjoyed going through all the questions, and I will see you in the next video. Bye guys.